time and ask questions. Or you can raise your little hand on the down there on your reactions menu. You can raise your hand and I'll try to notice that as well. I also usually watch in case you unmute yourself. So it is Thursday. This is the first, is it? I think it's the first Thursday of our, maybe it's the second of our fall series, which is going to take us through the end of the year. We do have, sorry, Abby, there's going to be some changes next week to the schedule. I'm not sure exactly what that looks like yet. I'm not going to be available on Wednesday, so I may bump Wednesday to Thursday. And then we'll just loop the forms that I was going to cover on Thursday into the next Thursday. Because I feel like the training that we had next Wednesday to finish that buyer transaction checklist, the buyer contract to close, is really important. So that's probably what we'll end up doing. Tuesday, we'll talk about showing homes. We'll open up berries. I'll show you some tricks in there. Wednesday, we won't have training. And then Thursday, we'll cover the last section of buyer contract to close. So hopefully Abby caught that so she can communicate that to Carly and update the office. My appointment that we were supposed to have yesterday got rescheduled at the last minute yesterday morning. Of course, it's 2.5 hours for us to the part where Kaylin's appointment was. So we were already on the road and gone. And then it got rescheduled to next week. Although I may, Abby, don't send out the change yet because I may try to change the appointment. So just everybody stay tuned. We'll figure it out. But it's kind of a moving target at this point. So anyways, it's Forms Thursday in our fall series.
More important than a class, young lady.
Yes, but I really enjoy the classes. So more so than sitting at doctor's offices. So anyways, today is Forms Thursday. We're covering the additional agent acknowledgement, or the AAA form, as well as the ABA form, which is the additional broker acknowledgement. So those are two forms that may come into play. You may not see them very often, but they will at some point in your career come into play. And we'll talk about some reasons why you may use them. Yes, Anastasia.
What's the difference between the ASA and the AAAA?
The AAAA, hold on. The ASA is the additional signature addendum. So the AAA is the additional agent acknowledgement versus an ASA, which is an additional signature addendum. So the ASA gets used, we talked about that one, I think last week. That gets used when you have more than 2 buyers or sellers. We use the ASA for the additional signatures for the buyers 3, 4, and 5, or sellers 3, 4, and 5. So the ASA is for buyers and sellers when you have more than 2, versus an additional agent acknowledgement is for when you have more than 1 agent working on the transaction. Did that answer your question?
Yes, ma'am. Sorry. I was having
Fabulous. Fabulous. So that's what we're covering today. Hold on, I'm just looking at something really quick. Okay, just double checking. All right, so your additional agent acknowledgement, why would you ever use this form? Well, one reason that you would use this form is if you are on a team with another agent, or maybe you worked at an open house. And part of that working of the open house was that you were, any leads that came in, you were going to work together and split them 50-50 or something like that, or split it 60-40. And so you want credit in the MLS for also closing that transaction, right? So if you have an agreement with another agent for a transaction, or the other reason this may come into play is, let's say that Yolanda is preparing to go on vacation and she's going to be gone for a week, and she's like, hey, Anastasia, can you handle my files while I'm gone? And then when you go on vacation next month, I'll cover your files. And you're like, yeah, that sounds great. I highly recommend in that situation that you put in an additional agent acknowledgement form into your file, and you'll see why here in a minute. So if somebody's covering your files, you should document that with an additional agent acknowledgement. Or if, like I said, you have a team or you've worked out a co-representation agreement with another agent in our office to represent a client for whatever reason, then you should have this in your file. Okay. So the additional agent acknowledgement, it's car form AAA, was revised in 2021. So it's been a little while since it's been updated. For the most part, it's going to be an addendum to the purchase agreement. It could also be an addendum to the residential listing agreement. So keep that in mind, that if it is if it's for a listing, then it would be, you check this box for the listing agreement. The other option they give you here is the buyer representation agreement. So if there's two agents working that file from the very beginning, then you would want to check that when they sign. They should probably update that. It should be the BRBC, because that's the only form that exists now. But the buyer representation agreement, they're referring to that BRBC form. Or there's the other box, like they always give us on our car forms, the others, right? You're going to put the date. Usually that's going to be the date that's in the upper left hand printed on the first page of the document that you're referencing. Again, if there's no printed date on that document in the upper right or left hand corner, sometimes they vary, then it would be the date of the last signature of the client on the signature lines. Okay, so that's how that works. You're going to put the address in there, sample street. If for some reason, like if it was to the buyer representation agreement and you were marking that there's going to be an additional agent acknowledgement, you probably ultimately don't need this form completed until you're actually making an offer. So very rarely would you do it, the buyer representation. There's you could do like, it would be more appropriate to do it like a modification of terms, but you could do this at that time. You could put buyer representation agreement, the date there. For the property address, you could probably get away with going to be determined. Right? So if it was the buyer representation agreement, you would put buyer representation agreement dated, and then the property known as to be determined between, and then here's where your buyer, right? So buyer 1 and buyer 2. Oh, it doesn't like me when I do that. I don't know why my computer's broken. Buyer 2, right? Buyer's name's there. If it was the buyer representation agreement, keep in mind that you would be property here, buyer's name's here, and then your name or the brokerage, Realty One. I can't spell today. Group Fox. Yeah, it's not going to go there. Fox goes there, right? Because it's seller, landlord, broker. So we can fill that line in with anything. Okay. So in this case, if it was a buyer representation agreement, it'd be buyer 1, buyer 2, and it would be Realty One Group Fox. And then down here, if this was like to the purchase agreement, right, we were doing this at time of offer, you would want to do another one. So if you did it at time of representation agreement, you would want to do another one at time of offer so that the listing agent and the seller can acknowledge it. Adriana, did you have a question?
Yeah, I joined. When would you use this additional agent acknowledgement?
Yeah, so you're going to use the additional agent acknowledgement anytime that you have more than one agent working a transaction. So if you're on a team, you have an agreement in place with another agent on a specific client for any reason. Maybe it was an open house lead and you guys are sharing those leads, maybe whatever that might be. Or maybe you were going to go on vacation and you wanted an agent to cover your files for you during the time that you're on vacation and you have active files. You would also want this form in there just to make sure that everybody was on the same page, that while Adriana's on vacation, Amy has the right to communicate on her behalf. She is now the acting agent. So until you return, right? So you would utilize it for either of those scenarios. Anytime you have more than one agent working on a transaction or doing communication with the other side.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep, absolutely. All right, so that's how you fill out the top section. Again, it would be the brokers here, or if we did it to the purchase agreement, then it would be buyer's names and then seller's names here. Seller 1. And if it was the purchase agreement, then you would obviously fill in the full address here. And then again, as I usually mention, not always, VACA, VIL. Make sure that you put, you know, if it's sample street, court, drive, lane, parkway, whatever it might be, because there might be a 1, 2, 3 sample street and a 1, 2, 3 sample court. So you might have multiple street numbers and names with different suffix. It happens a lot, especially in that Solano County area. You see it all the time. All right. So anyways, so that's how you fill it out. If it was to the purchase agreement, you just fill it out that way. You're going to check in section 1, we're checking only one box. So this is an or, it's either A or B. If more than one applies, use separate forms for each. Multiple associate licensees working with the seller or multiple associate licensees working with the buyer. Are we talking about the seller or the buyer here, right? So you're going to put in whatever it is. So we're going to go buyer here. The real estate licensees named below are conducting real estate license activity under the same broker. So the real estate broker name, Realty One Group, box. And if there was a team name, so if you were on a team, you would put that team name here. Okay. So like for me, we always put Petard, Riddle, and Associates there. If you didn't have a team, you're just co-working it with another agent or covering on vacation, you can just leave that blank. Okay, so that's how you fill out section 1. Same thing, if it was a seller, then you would check the seller box, and then you would use a separate form for the seller versus the buyer if you had multiple licensees working with both. B2B is the licensees below have entered into a separate written agreement to share responsibility and compensation for certain real estate license activity and have informed broker of and given broker a copy of that separate written agreement. So if you have an agreement to split the commission one way or the other, you would put it in here. The bonus about this is, let's say that I worked an open house with Maciel and we had an agreement going into it that, hey, any leads that come in, we're going to split 50-50. Right? One of us is going to work them. Whoever feels like they have the better rapport, they're actually going to be like the contacts person, but we're going to split that 50-50 or maybe 60-40 or whatever it is. So you're going to have that agreement in place. You're going to submit that. If I put both agents' names here, so if I put my name and I put in your license number and then Maciel here, hopefully I spelled her last name correctly, and we put in her license number here. I don't know what her license number is, but we'll just go with that. Now what happens is when that transaction goes to close, the agent on the other side, when they put into the MLS, the buyer's brokerage information, they're going to put both of your names, or they should put both of your names into the MLS. You can instruct them to do so. If you were just covering for vacation, then you may want to instruct them at close of escrow, hey, please just put Maciel's name on there when you go to input the information into the MLS for the close of escrow versus both. But if you guys had an agreement, you were on a team, you had an agreement in place for like an open house lead, and you both wanted credit in the MLS for that closing, there's some benefits to that. Then you would want to make sure to have this form in place so that both your names could go on that listing when it goes to get marked closed. Okay, it gives you lines for like up to 5 agents here. Yes.
So on the RPA, like I can't remember on there, but there's only room for one on there, for one agent on the RPA.
So here's the trick. Okay, on the RPA and the listing agreement, both, I believe, there are rooms for 2 agents to sign. The reason that I choose oftentimes to not list the second agent on the residential purchase agreement or on the listing agreement is that then that agent has to sign that document. And sometimes that might hold up getting usually on the listing agreement we do it, but on the purchase agreement we do not, because waiting for another agent to open up their DocuSign or the AuthentiSign and sign something could delay you being able to make that offer on a property. So oftentimes, instead of putting it on the purchase agreement, we put it on this AAAA form, because on this, only one agent has to sign it.
This form?
This form.
Only needs one signature also?
It only needs one agent's signature.
Oh,
so
okay.
like if this was my transaction and I was drawing up an offer for buyer 1 and buyer 2, I would list both of our names here, that, hey, we're with the same brokerage, both our names here, and then I would sign down here. You don't even have to sign it. And then it's done.
Oh, okay. So can you keep scrolling up? So if we say we were with different brokerages, because we're not a team, where
if
Where
you
does
were
it
with,
say that?
yeah, so if you're different brokerages, we'll cover that form here in a minute. That's the ABA, the additional broker acknowledgement form.
Oh, gotcha. Okay.
So this form is specifically utilized when you're working with another agent inside our office, whether it's on a team or some sort of agreement in place, where they should either get compensated, where they're covering you. I'll show you that here in a second, or where you are supposed to get some sort of recognition for working it. So in like a mentor-mentee situation, you wouldn't use this form because most of the time the mentee is doing the communication on the file. Even if the mentor had to step in, it's just like here and there. It's really not that big a deal. You wouldn't use this form because they aren't fully involved in the file as far as all the communication. Okay. So, right. So if you have a written agreement for compensation, that goes to the broker. Section 3 is by signing below, all parties understand, acknowledge, and agree that wherever the name of any licensee above is indicated on the agreement or related document as a representative for the buyer or seller specified in 1A or B above, the other licensee shall also be deemed to be named. The listing broker and seller signatures are not necessary if this form is only used to modify a buyer representation agreement. Selling broker and buyer signatures are not necessary if this form is only used to modify a listing agreement. So if we're modifying a listing agreement, adding the second agent on there, or the buyer representation agreement, the BRBC, not all the signatures have to be in place. If it was the BRBC, it would just be buyers and the buyer's brokerage. If it was the listing agreement, it would just be the sellers and the seller's brokerage. Okay, but if we're writing an offer on a property, all the signatures need to be in place, or generally at time of if it's a listing agent, if there's more than one, we would utilize this. And the reason we like this form is if Brittany goes on vacation and I'm covering her files, and now I have to submit a document that requires the agent's signature on it. This is stating that my signature is as good as Brittany's signature. On our RPA, it said Brittany was the agent, but this form says that, hey, anytime you see either of our signatures, it's okay. So this just is kind of a cover yourself if you go on vacation to make sure there's never any questions as to the validity of the person covering your files and what they're allowed to do or not allowed to do. It's good to have this in the file. If you have a team or a agreement in place where you're sharing clients, then I would absolutely make sure you include this form, because again, it's saying that, hey, only one of those people has to sign, and it's speaking for all of them. Okay, does that make sense to everybody?
Yes.
Yes. All right. Buyer signs, seller signs, seller's brokerage firm, buyer's brokerage firm. Again, as we talked about, if you're modifying the listing agreement, if this is like to the listing agreement, then it would just be the seller and the seller's brokerage firm. If it was a modification to the BRBC form, it would just be buyer and the buyer's brokerage firm. If you're not modifying that listing agreement, like oftentimes I send this out with the listing agreement, but I send it out with the intention of I'm going to upload it to my HomeLight listing management file. And I want the buyers, this is going to serve as the buyer's notice and the buyer's agent's notice. I want them all to sign it as well. Then I would expect them to sign it, and I would usually leave it just defaulted to the purchase agreement. We're going to fill in that date and the address at that time. But I'm going to go ahead and sign it and have my client sign it ahead of time. Okay, so that is your additional agent acknowledgement form. Any further questions? Do we have any questions on this form? All right. The next form is the ABA form. So this would be like an additional broker acknowledgement and addendum. So this would be where you have two agents from separate brokerages working on a transaction together, representing the same clients. And you're like, Amy, why would that ever happen? Well, who knows why it would happen? But a couple of instances where you might see that is maybe there's a divorce going on and the husband and wife both can't agree on one agent to represent them in the sale of their property. and they both want to hire separate agents, you might choose to like work together with another agent so that both the husband and the wife, both spouses, feel like they're being represented in that transaction. So that might be one instance where you would have an additional broker acknowledgement and addendum, where you have more than one brokerage working together to get a transaction done. The other time that you might have it or see it is we've had some transactions where maybe you have the agent who lives in San Diego and they're basically doing a referral, but they don't really want to let go of the control of the transaction to another agent. And they're like, hey, Anastasia, for 30%, will you go open doors for me? Will you show them properties? Will you do that portion of it? And then I'll do most of the paperwork, but I'm going to need you to do the agent visual inspection disclosure. Right? Oh my gosh.
I want
So
it in writing.
yeah, right. You want it in writing. And now because your name is going to be on the agent visual inspection disclosure, there are now two brokerages working together on this transaction. Okay, because you have to sign and do the agent, the AVID, and your name's going to be on that AVID, and then the other agent's going to sign. That's two brokerages working together. So that's where you would also utilize this additional broker acknowledgement and addendum, the ABA form. So the top looks very similar to the last one, right? It's an addendum to the listing agreement, the purchase agreement, the buyer representation agreement, or other. This one defaults to the listing because we see this oftentimes on listings, but it does happen with buyers as well. You've got the date here, so don't forget to put that date. Remember, it's going to be the printed date in the upper right or left-hand corner of the first page of that document. Then you're going to put in either the seller's names or the buyer's, whoever you're representing, right? So we're going to put buyer 1 and buyer 2, right? And then here you're going to put either the seller or the buyer or the broker, right? If that's not confusing, I don't know what is. So if it's an addendum to the purchase agreement, then here would go the seller's names, right? All right, and then you're going to put the property address there. Same thing as before. Make sure you put the full address in there. The listing agreement, fill this section out if applicable as indicated above. So if this was in reference to the listing agreement, here's where you would put the compensation breakdown. So it's got, right, broker 1. So this would be like Realty 1 Group Fox, and broker 2. This might be Realty 1 Group Complete, right? I think that's the one that's up in the Sacramento area. So maybe we're working together on a transaction. Our co-listing brokers under the listing agreement identified above and agree to share responsibility and compensation for the representation of the seller as follows, right? Compensation breakdown. This is where you might put total compensation. I can't spell. Compensation to be split. It's really that not that I can't spell, it's that I can't type. 50-50, right? Or it might be like 60 to ROG complete. %, ROG box. Okay, so you'd want to spell out what that is. Here, a compensation breakdown, is there equally and jointly share responsibility, or is there a different responsibility being shared? Right? Or you could go on the terms of the attached agreement, right? So your option here is compensation breakdown, equally and jointly share responsibility, or blank, or on the attached agreement. So if you want to spell it out and have more space, you could do it there. So here's where you might put complete to do paperwork, and Fox to do boots on ground, right? So whatever that might be, you could spell it out there, or you could do it attached agreement. Any questions there on section 1 if it's in reference to the listing agreement?
What was the ROG complete part that you wrote?
Oh, that was just the other Realty 1 group that I was
got you.
pretending that we were co-brokering it with.
Got it. I see. I was like reading it again. I'm like, what? I get it.
Yeah, there. Just referencing the other brokerage. So 60% to Rog Complete, the other brokerage, 40% to Rog Fox, whoever that might, however you want to split it up. Any other questions on section 1? All right. Section 2 is if it's in reference to a buyer representation agreement. So obviously, if it's not a listing agreement, we're doing it in reference to a buyer representation agreement or that BRBC form, then we would not fill out section 1. We would just fill out section 2. Fill out this section if applicable as indicated above. You're still going to put the same thing here, right? Broker 1 would go down here instead of up there. Probably should have like X. There we go. And then same thing here for broker number 2. It doesn't matter which order you put them in. It really makes no difference. Compensation breakdown. Here's where you would put that compensation breakdown. So this section is a lot like the top section. In fact, it's so much like the top section. I'm just taking it out of that top section and putting it down here. Right, so compensation breakdown, equally and jointly share responsibility or blank, right? So who's sharing responsibility? Or you could check on the terms of the attached agreement. So very the same as the listing agreement for the buyer representation agreement. You have the same options there. Any question on section 2? Okay, if we had a multiple brokers representing a buyer or a seller, you would fill one of these out at time of listing agreement. You would also want to fill one of these out at time of the purchase agreement being drawn up in reference to the purchase agreement. So more than likely for most files, if you have an ABA form, you're going to have 2. The reason being is that ultimately the other party, they probably don't need to know this information, how we're splitting the commission when it's all said and done. Okay. That's really the only reason. Otherwise, you could utilize the same thing, but your buyers and sellers are going to sign the final version. All the parties are going to sign the final version of it. So if it was in reference to a listing agreement or purchase agreement, you would put your clients here on the first line. You would put the brokerages here, and then you'd fill out this information here. And then section 3 is purchase agreement or other. Fill out this section if applicable as indicated above. Check only one box. If more than one applies, use separate forms for each. So you'd put either this, it's beginning to look a lot like that AAA form, multiple brokers representing the seller or multiple brokers representing the buyer. So who has the representation of more than one broker? So you would check that box. So if we said, hey, it's the buyer, then here's where you would fill in, both of those brokerages, Realty One Group Fox and Realty One Group Complete, right? So broker 1, broker 2 are real estate brokers who have entered into agreement to share responsibility and compensation for the representation of a buyer. The same portion, if it was the multiple brokers representing the seller in the top section, it would be the same thing like, hey, it's broker 1, broker 2 are parties to a residential listing agreement or other. You're going to fill in the date of that listing agreement in which they have agreed to share responsibility and compensation for the seller. Okay. So on the one, if you have an ABA form, you're probably going to have 2. One for the listing agreement between the clients and the brokers for the listing agreement, and then one when that property enters into contract to let everybody know that, hey, there's multiple brokers representing the sellers, and you're just going to fill out this bottom section number 3. Okay. Agent for brokerage number 1. So this section always gets filled out. Here's where you get to put in the agent information, who for that brokerage or which agent is representing that broker. So it might be like, right, with your license number. And then you would put agent number 2 here with their license number there. Okay, so that's where you put in who's the agents that are representing those brokerages. And then there's an extra box here. It says activity under the license of broker 1 or broker 2 or both as applicable, but will be conducted by multiple associate licensees, partners, or teams as indicated on the attached additional agent acknowledgement form, CAR form AAA. And you're like, oh no, now I'm crying. No, it's not a big deal. If there's just one agent representing each broker, it's not a big deal. If like it was a team and I was helping Realty One Group complete with this, then we may need to check this box so that then both myself and Shannon are included on that as well, right? So if there's more than one agent for one of the two brokerages, we would want to include the AAA form as well. Okay. By signing below, all parties understand, acknowledge, and agree that whenever the name of either broker one or broker two, as applicable, as indicated on the agreement or related documents, as a representative for the buyer or seller specified in 1, 2, or 3 above, the other brokerage shall be deemed to be named. Buyer signatures are not necessary only if paragraph 1 of this form is completed. Seller signatures are not necessary only if paragraph 2 of this form are completed. Okay. If you're gonna have an ABA form, if you're sharing compensation with another brokerage versus just doing a referral, please make sure to run it by our broker first or your broker first and make sure everybody is in agreement on how this is gonna play out. Some brokers may not be okay with that. Okay, so just a little word of advice there, check in with your broker first, but that's how you would complete this form. So section 1 or 2, second form for section 3 would go here. Agents' names in section 4 always gets filled out. If there's more than one agent for the broker, then you would check this box here. And then you would also fill out that AAA form that we covered first. And then you have all of the signatures. So you have the real estate broker, broker 1 signs here, real estate broker, broker 2 signs here, and it's actually got to be signed by the broker, not the agent. So keep that in mind. It's either signed by the broker or the office manager. So this is very similar to the referral form, where that also has to be signed by the broker or the office manager. Okay, so not by you. Then we've got sellers' names get signed here and buyers get signed there. Notice the other brokerage on the other side does not have to sign this form. Any questions about this ABA form?
Not that one, but the other one.
Yes.
So you were saying like with the team that you fill that one out. So like, for example, like you and Shannon are a team. So are you guys filling this out for every transaction?
We fill it out for every transaction.
Got it. Okay.
Yep. It would look like that.
Is it the AA, is it 4 A's or 3 A's?
It used to be 4 A's, but now it appears to only be 3 A's. It's
Okay.
just additional agent acknowledgement now, AAA.
And thank you for correcting that real estate attorney on the form that he was going over the other day.
If you're not up to date on it's the same form, it's just a different name. I just was like, people, if you're looking for that BRE form, you're not going to find it because it doesn't exist any longer.
I was like, what form is he talking about?
Yeah.
And then
The
you chimed
BRBC.
in, and I was like, okay, now it's clear.
Yeah, you know what? Hold on. We're just gonna look at this real quick. Additional agent assignment of let's hold on. That's the AOAA, right? That assignment. Yeah. So it's just the AAA form now. I don't know why. It used to be the AAAA. Now it's the AAA since the 21, but kind of like I still call it disclosures IO, even though it's home light listing management. I still call this one the AAAA. And I feel like it still references the AAAA in the, now I've got to look in the purchase agreement. Let's look. I'm probably just hallucinating. Any other questions why I find the purchase agreement here in my long list of documents?
So you'll clarify what classes we're having next week?
I will clarify later today or tomorrow. It will go out via Slack and probably on the Facebook page as well. Once I finalize the dates for what we have coming up next week. Hopefully I can eliminate next week's trip. So yes, I will clarify those dates and what we're covering. We will be covering, no matter what, we will cover the showing properties on Tuesday, and we will finish up the contract to close starting with day 3 for your buyer transactions. That'll happen either on Wednesday or Thursday. So just stay tuned to that. And if I move that to Thursday, there will be no class on Wednesday. It means I'm out of the loop on Wednesday. I can't multitask until I just stopped scrolling. I'd use my hands to talk to explain that, which meant that I couldn't keep scrolling on my document. All right, we're almost there. Let's see here. If more than one signers go there, down here in the brokers section, more than one agent. So just the AAA. So here on your purchase agreement, this is good. I usually reference back to the purchase agreement or the listing agreement. Here in your signature block for the real estate brokers section, this is where you're going to check those boxes. See, there are 2 signature lines on here for multiple agents to sign. We usually just put one on here, and then we use the AAA form where we put our additional agents information on there. But it's got more than one agent from the same firm represents the buyer, additional agent acknowledgement form attached, the AAA, or more than one brokerage from firm represents the buyer, additional broker acknowledgement form attached. So you would mark appropriately. And the same thing is down here for the seller's brokerage firm. You have the same options either for the AAA or the ABA. So that's where you find it. Yeah.
So you could fill that out there, but if you just leave it blank, how you only have one agent on there, and then you click on that, then you just submit the AAA with it.
Yeah.
So like,
yeah.
Is there another section like at the very top of the RPA where it has like seller, like who you like it says like you are the broker, like you're both the broker and the, you know how like at the very top, does that one have a space for 2 also, or just one?
I think that one has a space just for one because it's just the brokerage there. And I was going to check in case there was, you would think there might be like an ABA here, but this is why that comes into play. Remember on that ABA, it says the additional broker acknowledgement. If you had more than one brokerage, it says that, hey, anytime you see that one, it's basically counts as both of us. And that's part of the reason you bring that in regardless of what you have at the end. But yeah, so it just has the space for one up here. The only time you ever see space for 2 agent signatures is on the bottom of the RPA or the bottom of the listing agreement. Everything else that needs a agent signature is just one line.
How come, can you go to that, that spot right there? You know how it says like designated electronic delivery addresses, check all that apply. Like what, I know I've asked this before, but what exactly, like email, text, like what is that for? Like, why do we, like, why do we need to click on that?
Yeah, so the reason that we like to click on this here is that if we don't indicate and this is one of the updates that was done last year at the end of the year, so it's been there about a year now. But this was one of those updates when they did the major overhaul. And the reason this is because it used to be that you needed proof of delivery for your forms. So you needed the other agent on the other side to acknowledge that they had received it if you sent it via email. And the reason that was important was it became kind of a strategic game. If I submitted an offer and I thought they were going to answer that night, like at 10 o'clock at night, I would literally turn off my phone and not open my computer until the next morning, because there is no way that I wanted 10 o'clock at night to count that day as day 0 and me to have a wasted day 0. Okay, right? So then when they updated the form, so it was strategic. So if I didn't check my email and I didn't check my text and I didn't know that they had sent the forms over, I hadn't seen them, then when I opened it up the next morning, now I've seen the documents. It was delivered at 8 a.m. when I opened my email. I emailed back the other agent. Perfect, received it. Now that's day 0 instead of being day 1.
But how would they know anyways otherwise that you saw it?
They wouldn't, but I don't like to lie.
Okay, got it.
And I want it shown that like it was delivered, like even though they sent it, that it wasn't received in my email, that my email didn't get it until that morning. So anyways, when they updated the new form, they changed the rules on us, which is fine. It's actually probably good that they changed the rules. But one of those is that electronic delivery is if I have proof that I sent the offer to Maciel at the email she had indicated, then that counts as electronic delivery. If we don't check a box for electronic delivery, technically, they should be delivering it to us in a physical form. And that becomes really sticky and gross throughout the entire transaction. And we don't really want that. We want it to go through electronic delivery because we want it to count. I want it to count as received when they receive something that I send them over electronically and vice versa. So that's why we have this designated electronic delivery address. Is it
So that's
specified?
showing that we're emailing or texting it to them.
Yeah, at the
Like
email.
that's the proof. So like, let's say they don't have that, because like I've seen this where like they don't acknowledge that. So like, then that would benefit us that they didn't check that then.
Yeah, I
Like,
mean,
then you can
yeah,
say technically I didn't receive it because they didn't click on that
yeah,
box.
technically they can say, oh, well, that wasn't the email that we needed it delivered to. So you should always clarify and have that in writing someplace. If somebody doesn't check this box, which that's a good point, because I don't really ever pay attention to the listing agent side. If I'm submitting an offer, one of these boxes should be checked. So if they don't check these boxes, I'm immediately going to go like to text or to email and say, hey, you didn't check which box you at the bottom for the electronic delivery email and text number. Which email and text do you prefer for electronic delivery? And that way you've got it in writing someplace that this is what they said. The other option is that if you verify before you submit the offer, hey, is this the best text number for you? And they're like, yes. And you're like, hey, what email do you want me to submitting the offer to? And they're like, this one. You can actually go in there and pre-do it, right? We automatically put all the agent's information in there anyways on our purchase agreements. Oftentimes we're importing it from the MLS using the MLS import. So it automatically populates the agent's names, their license number, their brokerage, their addresses, oftentimes emails and phone numbers. Verify with them before you submit that offer that, hey, just verifying like which email do you want me to submit the offer to or any correspondence. If they're like, oh, I want you to submit the offer to HomeLight, be like, perfect. And for any email correspondence that we need outside of submitting the offer, which email do you want to use? Now they're telling you which email and you're like, is this the best number for you? And they're like, yes. Then we can come in here, we can fill in that email and that phone number and go ahead and check those boxes for them before we even submit that offer.
Okay, because I've seen other agents have like multiple emails, like on Berries, it'll have one email. And then when I've asked them, like, because it didn't say like submit via HomeLight, it says like email to this email. So then there's two different emails. And I'm like, whoops, well, I sent it to the other one. So I guess this, okay, got it.
Yeah. So as best practice, I would say, start checking with those other agents and say, hey, which phone number is best and which email is best for electronic delivery. And then that way,
sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say,
You
make sure you get that text number, because if you wanted to withdraw an offer or something and you were going to send that to them electronically, which you can do, then you've got identified which text is best as well.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
I was going to ask about the ABA. Well, I guess either of those forms, because you said when we're closing a listing and we're inputting the name of the other person, we should, I guess, this should be included. Well, it wouldn't be included with the offer, right? Or like how would, like if I'm submitting an offer, right? And it has this documentation that I'm working like with Anastasia on a deal, like does that get sent to them? Because that's more for like me and her, right? Like for ourselves to have.
Oh yeah, whatever that commission breakdown is does not have to get sent to the other side.
So, but then how would they know that there was two agents working on that file when they later on have to input that there is two agents on there?
So the commission breakdown doesn't need to go to the other side, but the additional agent acknowledgement would. So if you guys were working on it together, you guys were from the same brokerage, you would include this additional agent acknowledgement. It would reference the purchase agreement. It would have the address.
Just save it to, so just save two different forms then?
Yeah, you would need just something in writing, whatever the brokerage required to show what your commission split is, which is usually nothing. Usually you just tell them what it needs to be on your commission demand. And then by signing off on the commission demand, you're agreeing to whatever that split was. Oftentimes you don't need, for like a single transaction, they don't require a separate form. for the commission breakdown. But you would want something in writing between you and the other agent. So if there was never any.
No, I mean like for, like when like me and Anastasia are working on a deal together. So when that deal closes, that other agent is inputting the buyer's agent information. If there's two of us, how would they know that there is two instead of one?
Yeah,
That's
so
what
you're gonna include this AAA form with the offer.
Okay, got it.
So the AAA would go with the offer. And then I always remind them at close of escrow. Like I said, we do this all the time because Shannon and I work on all our deals together. So at close of escrow, before they mark it to sold, right? Like we're moving up to like the next day's close of escrow or the day of when we get notice of recording, then my transaction coordinator, who used to be the one that did it, they would send out the email and say, hey, thank you so much. Please make sure, we're still waiting on the following documents, whatever we needed to close out our file. And then also when you mark the property as sold, please remember to put both Amy and Shannon as the selling agents for the property. So they would always remind them.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yep. And if they don't, that's something that can be edited and varies really easily by the listing brokerage. Just an FYI on that. So you can have it updated.
Gotcha.
So yeah, any further questions on either of these forms?
Nope. It's been
Nope.
great.
Fabulous. Then stay tuned for our final schedule update for next week. I'll have that out hopefully later today. Well, it will be later today. It won't be hopefully. I'll make a couple phone calls and see what we're doing with our lives here shortly so that we can update that and you'll know whether it's the schedule as posted or whether we're going to move Wednesday to Thursday and then I'll move Thursday to next week. So we'll make that happen. I was just looking at the listing agreement as well so that you guys could see. Here's where it would be, let's see, seller signatures, 2 brokers. So here's where you would see the ABA form box on that listing agreement. It's at the very end of it. If you have 2 brokers, you mark that box and include the ABA. So there you go. Fabulous. Thank you everyone for joining us today. We will see you next week. And like I said, stay tuned for the schedule changes and we'll keep on trucking. And then Abby just put in the chat box the attendance form. So please make sure to click on that and log your attendance. And then as always, there's always a place where you can put any suggested trainings that you would like to see make the schedule. So as we put together the next schedule or we do some bonus trainings in there that we can make sure to get those in and get you the training that you're looking for. So thank you all. See you guys later.
Thank you.
Fabulous. Have a good day.